Welcome along to the Matchbook Horse Racing Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, standing in for Tom Stanley this week. Last minute, I may add, but delighted to welcome Steve Jones and Dan Overall to the podcast. Dan, it's not long until Cheltenham. Are you excited? It feels like, and we spoke about this in the Cheltenham Trail, it almost goes too quick in February. You want it to slow down just a tad because we're 2.5 weeks away.
It does, and the focus just boils into every conversation about Cheltenham. If I see one more Ballyburn Supreme versus Bingham argument on Twitter, I'm going to explode. Some of those things are getting a bit old hat already, but I mean, we had the handicap entries this week, handicap weights next week. That's what really gets me excited for Cheltenham. Then we really are there, so really is building up now.
And Steve, you've all your prep done ahead of our preview night on Monday night?
I've done all my prep for this weekend yet.
One show at a time, Steve. One show at a
time. Exactly. The other thing's weeks away.
Yeah, the true 2.5 to be exact. But joke aside, Steve,
it's 3.5, isn't it?
It's you wish, mate. You wish. Steve, Dan Overall, Tom Stanley, plenty of other guests: Don McLean, Matt Toombs, Charlie Post, and Mihal DC will be on our Cheltenham preview night. We're hoping to be one of the first out Monday, 7:15 on our YouTube channel and Twitter channel as well, live. So very much a lot of free bets and competitions to be had on the night. If you can get involved in the live show, be well worth doing. Other than that, before we get going, hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on the podcast, a 5-star review will be much appreciated. Steve's just double checking it's 2.5 weeks to Cheltenham as we get ahead to the 150.
3.5.
Is it 3.5?
Yeah, luckily.
Oh, is it 3.5, Chet Dan? 2.5. You know?
That's 2.5.
2.5, Steve. 2.5.
3.5, definitely.
Kempton, 115. We'll take a look at the 2.5 mile handicap hurdle, and we'll give you prices in a second. But Dan, take it away on your thoughts on this race, the opener on ITV.
I thought it was it's one of those races where normally I try and find something. And to be honest, the closest I came was Steve's selection, which he'll go on about shortly. But everything I looked at, I just found something to caveat against him. I mean, really open handicap, this one. No Ordinary Joe is kind of coming back to a mark where he could be competitive, but question marks about form. And they seem to take 2 hours to book a jockey for him, which is never really a sign of confidence. So a race for me that I won't be having a bet in.
Okay, we don't have to bet on every race. Steve, take it away with your selection.
Yeah, I thought it was a clever selection. I thought it would be a bigger price, to be honest, The Invasion, who is making his handicap debut after showing plenty of promise in 3 novice hurdles. And if you go back to his point-to-point form in Ireland, which, okay, is not exactly the cast iron kind of form that you want, but there's plenty of promise to think that he's going to stay the longer, or like the longer distance. He was second to Slade Steele in an Irish point-to-point. Slade Steele, who has done really well for Henry de Bromhead, won a Grade 2 in Ireland and was second to Ballyburn in the Grade 1 at Leopardstown at the Dublin Racing Festival. So that gave you a bit of a good starting point with this horse. But what he's done in novice hurdles, has been decent form. He was third to Jericho de Repenay, albeit the winner won very easily. That was at Newbury in December. Boxing Day, he finished fourth to Caught in the Act in a race that historically has thrown up some good horses. Caught in the Act won it this year. And he was the only one to make any ground from off the pace that day. The 3 in front of him were all ridden more prominently. And I think he's got in off a good mark. And the other interesting thing is Chris Gordon has really hit form in the last few weeks. He's had a bit of a struggling. I was at Huntingdon the other day, and he had a runner in the first, and it was absolutely tipping it down. It was Sydney Banks Hurdle Day, and I said to him, we'll call the meeting off after you've had a winner. And he said the problem with that is it probably take 2 years. So he has had a bit of an iffy season, but he's definitely back in good form now, and they're all running really well. And that points to See Invasion off a very lightweight having a really good chance. But it's 7.5. I was expecting double figures, to be honest.
Would you still back it then at 7.5, just tentatively?
Yeah, a little bit. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him drift a little bit out from that.
Yeah, these are initial prices. Yeah, we're recording this on Thursday lunchtime. And yeah, Chris Gordon had a really good season last season. So perhaps one to keep an eye on with his horses getting back into form. We'll move on to the Adonis, the 150 at Kempton. Khalif de Burley is your slightly odds-on fav. The prices I'm looking at here give me 5.0. Peking Opera, 7.0. Captain Marvelous, 8.5, 11.0, and bigger the rest. So Dan, take it away. You do like the favorite here at around evens.
I do, yeah. I know there's a few in here that are interesting, but for Khalif de Burley, that performance on his British debut, there are just some performances that stick with you for a season. It may not be most winning distance or anything like that, but some just stick with you for other reasons. And this, to me, I just thought was the performance of a really professional, promising juvenile hurdler. Did everything right. I think the only thing you could crab him slightly was the fact he jumped slightly to his left, but he was jumping fluently. He was just kind of had a preference to go slightly out to his left. I don't think that's really going to be too much of a barrier to success. He was briefly shaken up before the last, easily put a few extra lengths between him and the rest of his rivals, and put in a massive jump at the last as well, showing how much he had left. He just seems to be a really promising horse. All the talk afterwards was future Gold Cup horse. And while that's obviously premature, I do think he's one of those typical Paul Nicholls juvenile hurdlers who he's probably not going to go to Cheltenham based on everything we know, but he's going to be one of those in a couple of years' time. You think he's going to be a really serious horse over fences. The form of that race last time out was worked out pretty well. He was giving £8 away to pretty much all the field. The second's now 823, was actually beaten by the fifth the other day, Cadeau de Jouy. He was actually the only one who tried to go with Khalif de Burley on his recent start. The third also won next time out. So the form of, for all that at the time it looked pretty modest, has actually worked out surprisingly well. He just seems to be held in extremely high regard. And although there are some interesting types, and it will take a decent performance to give weight to some of these, he's a horse I have really high expectations of in the future.
Okay, yeah, Steve, your thoughts on the favourite before your selection here?
Oh, yeah, it was very impressive. First time up, and the form has stacked up. But he did have an advantage that day of having run in France and won in France. And he was taking on horses mainly making their hurdles debut. And now he's got to give the penalty away. So it's just, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he won. But he's stepping into a deeper race than he was in last time. And he's got to give weight away. So I prefer to back something at a bigger price. And that is Peking Opera, who was it's flat form. He was fourth in the Irish Derby. And there's not a huge amount of horses that go from Aidan O'Brien and do well over hurdles. I accept that. But first time up over hurdles since joining Gary Moore. He won a nice race at Sandown. So I thought that was a good starting point for him. He travelled really well, as you would expect, a horse with plenty of flat class. And he was very tough up the finish against horses that were, A, had already run over hurdles, and B, were mostly older than him. So although he was getting a lot of weight, I think that was a really good performance and kind of an indication that Gary Moore was confident enough to put him in a race against experienced older horses rather than a weaker juvenile hurdle. And if you go back to his flat form again, his last run, he was third to Vauban at Nace in a Group 3. So he's got a lot of class. And what's he been put in at something like 10.0? That really overestimates his ability and his chance in this race.
Okay, Peking Opera in and around 10.0 and 2.0 Khalif de Burley. We move on to the 227 Novices Chase. Dan, I'm surprised, highly competitive Novices Chase. You don't have selection here?
Honestly, this is an absolute minefield of a race, I thought. I mean, obviously, the Nickelback was the anti-post favourite for this and wasn't declared. And I can't believe Blow Your Wad's favourite, to be honest. I think that shows you where we're at in terms of the state of the Novice Chase division in Britain to a certain extent, because this is just... He was well beaten in that novice handicap chase at Cheltenham. Maybe you could argue he wants flatter tracks and does have form at the course, but even that form at the course was in a handicap of a much lower mark. Now in a Grade 2 against some decent rivals. I mean, so Le Patron would be of interest, or assuming front-running tactics again after he was held up in the Silly R's, which didn't suit. But then you've got the likes of Arclight in here, who's been a very progressive, a former filly now mare, who was making hay earlier this season. Still looks very impressive, but this is a tougher ask. Tamuras seems suspect in terms of his attitude at times, beating a free runner race by Corabilia the other day. And Pembroke, I think, has never actually won a chase in which another horse has finished a race. I think it's just a real minefield for me, and one I'm just happy to leave alone.
Yeah, you mentioned Blow Your Wad, 8.0 anti-post now, 4.5 favourite, probably by default. But look, Steve, it may not be the best grade 2 in the world, but it is competitive grade 2, which is a rare thing in Britain this last couple of years, really.
Yeah, it's a race that's got a good history, and it's thrown up some good winners in the past. Pic Dory won it a couple of years ago. Paul Nicholls got an excellent record in it, and he's got a chance with tomorrow's. It's a competitive race. I think Arclight, what she's done over fence, I've been really impressed with her jumping. She's very much a horse on the up. She's unbeaten over fences, and she's had a nice break since beating Marsh Wren at Wincanton. I think runs in Ireland has got a good chance in a listed race. So although she's been doing it against other mares, she is very progressive, and she's surprisingly taken well to fences because she's kind of flat bred. She was a horse that's come from the flat, and they've switched her to fences very early in her career, and it's paid off. And not only does she get the mare's allowance, she gets the age allowance as well, because she's a 5-year-old taking on older horses, so she's getting lumps of weight off them. And I think with her course form, she was a winner on her chase debut earlier in the season when she jumped really well, apart from the last, I think it was, when she nearly unshipped Nico de Boinville. So listen, she's taken on Geldings for the first time, but I've been really impressed with her jumping, and I think that's going to stand her in good stead.
Oh, okay. We will lock in Arclights around 7.0 for Steve, no bet for Dan. So we'll go to Dan first on the next rate, which is the 3 o'clock at Kempton. And Dan, we've agreement between yourself and Steve. We'll just take a look at the betting very quickly. Lump Sum is 3.0 favourite. Fiercely Proud, which we'll get to 4.5 now, nipped in from 5.0. Secret Squirrel, 6.5. And Panjari, 8.0. I mentioned a little bit of money for Fiercely Proud's post-Dex. Dan, that must have been yourself and Steve getting on before this podcast.
I think, yeah, definitely so. I mean, also, I just thought the gap between Lump Sum and Fiercely Proud was far too big based on the very narrow margin between them in the Jericho, the Repine race, and the Rossington Main. And I think for all that Lump Sum did well to stay on that day, it was obviously Doncaster, a bit of a stiffer track, long straight that he just stayed on into. Fiercely Proud to me is more of your Dovecote horse in that he's a strong travelling proper 2-miler, and he has a lot of very good form. And in fact, all of his wins I think have come on, bar one at Cheltenham, have come on sharp right-handed tracks, which just seems to suit. I think he's the type you generally expect to win a Dovecote, full of speed, generally travels prominently. He's just a real proper quick horse. You look through the Roll of Honour for this race, you generally get those types who then don't necessarily go to the higher echelons, but are in those top 2-mile handicaps trying to make all. Ben Pauling's yard in absolutely flying form. And I just think the gap between him and Lump Sum was too big. And I think that may continue to contract, because I think a lot of people will be thinking likewise that this test will suit Fiercely Proud a lot more than it will suit Lump Sum.
Yeah, Steve, anything to add?
No, I agree with that. Yeah, it was with Lump Sum. He just wasn't put in the race, or he wasn't in the heat of the race like Fiercely Proud was. And although he's beaten him 3/4 of a length, I thought there was much the better performance from Fiercely Proud. Lump Sum was just one that came and picked the pieces up late. Never at any point looked like beating Jericho de Repine. And although Fiercely Proud, didn't, but at least he tried to. The Lump Sum was never in that race. And I also think that the track is going to suit Fiercely Proud. So, and with Ben Pauling in great form and Ben Jones riding really well, I think he's definitely, I wouldn't be surprised to see him backed even further,
Okay, we'll lock in Fiercely Proud around the 4.5, 5.0 mark at time of recording. Move on to the final race from Kempton, and the featured race here is the Carl Trophy Handicap Chase. And we'll take a look at the betting that we currently have on matchbook.com. Phlegmatic 6.0, Tweed Skirt 8.0, same price as Forward Plan. Blackjack Magic 9.0 alongside Lord Badsley. Bow to Greatness 11.0, I'll Dancer and Il Doto, and bigger prices the rest. Steve, you have a couple of selections here and one at a massive price, so I'm looking forward to these cases.
Yeah, Unanswered Prize is the one at the big price, who's had a breathing operation since he last ran, went 5th to Tweed Skirt. That was over this course and distance. If that was the problem, breathing, then if you go back to the previous runs in November, unanswered prayers, although he didn't finish, which is a little bit of a problem. But he was hampered in one of those when he unseated at the last, when he was running really well. He was behind Hold That Taut and T Clipper. And before that, he ran really well behind Victorino before falling at the last again. So he's having a problem with the last fence at Ascot. But it showed that he's somewhere near them, and he's come down in the handicap a little bit since then. So on the back of that breathing operation and the fact that Chris Gordon is in much, much, much better form, I thought he was just overpriced. But the one I really fancy is Bow to Greatness. Ben Pauling's again an informed trainer. And he's yet to hit the form this season. But Bow to Greatness, you can understand the pulled up in the Mandarin over Christmas at Newbury. The ground was appalling that day. He goes on soft ground, but the ground that day at Newbury was pretty awful. It was later in the afternoon as well, and he made mistake. He couldn't jump out of the ground. Last time against Ginny's Destiny, he ran probably better than he probably still trying to find his form. But if you go back to his run at Aintree last season on Grand National Day, I think it was the race before the Grand National, and it was up to 3 miles for the first time over fences, and he ran a cracker. He might have won had he not got in close to the last, whereas Midnight River, the winner, really met it on a long stride and was able to get momentum out the back of the last fence, and that a relatively short run in at Aintree was the key. And I think this horse is well handicapped. And I think with Ben Pauling in good form and Ben Jones riding really well, I think he's got an outstanding chance.
So Chris Gordon and Ben Pauling horses for Steve for the podcast. That's where we're at, Steve. All the way through.
That's about it. That's about it.
Till we get to Subtle, of course. Dan, you have a selection. You're broadening your horizons a small bit beyond those two trainers.
Yeah, to Anthony Honeyboy, who's got a quarter of the field in this. I mean, we only had 14 entries for such a massive handicap, 85 grand to the winner. That was pretty poor, and he had 4 entries at that stage. So now 12 runners, he's declared 3. And I think obviously Forward Plan, I think, was towards the head of the market for him, but I thought Blackjack Magic of his probably had the better chance in my opinion. Obviously won the Badger Beers earlier this season, beating 3 under through 5, and we saw win last weekend. They pulled well clear. Only went up £6 for that, which based on the distance they put between the rest of themselves, obviously 3 under through 5 subsequent form, that seems a pretty fair rise. He then went to Ascot, where he again ridden prominently, which is his normal style, and he was the best of those who was up with the pace on that occasion. Everything else that in and around him was all held up off the pace. He finished 4th, but would have been 2nd if not for ploughing through the last fence. Like, really bad mistake. That race has worked out pretty well with Victorino as the winner. Yeah, man, who obviously won the Grand National Trial the other day. And Phlegmatic just narrowly got up to be 3rd to Blackjack Magic, because he won next time out, his favourite here. But Blackjack Magic now is on £3 better terms. And given he would have beaten Phlegmatic if he'd not made that mistake, I think that's a good pointer to him having a good chance here, especially at the prices. And with the weight adjustment, a bit disappointing at Sandown last time out, but that was on 12 stone. Error 2 out again, just ended any winning chance he had, and that was good ground. And I think finally he's going to get back on a bit of a softer surface, which he seems to appreciate. He wouldn't want it really heavy, but the going at Kempton is a bit up in the air because they're on the edge of a band of rain, it seems. But every forecast I'm seeing is looking at about 10 mils today. So you think it's going to be on the soft side there, which will really suit him. His run style, which is normally forward, was really going to suit Kempton as well. And Sam Twiston-Davis generally excels on these types of staying chasers, ridden positively. First time blinkers is an interesting angle. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but I think a resumption of the form he's been showing back on softer ground. He's still relatively unexposed at these trips. I think he's got a good each way chance in this.
Okay, Blackjack Magic, 11.0, Bow to Greatness, 9.0, and Unanswered Prayers, a swinger for Steve at 34.0. We'll move on to the one race from Newcastle we're going to cover here, which is the Eider. Love this Saturday when we've the Eider and the Carl Trophy, 2 big handicaps. Dan, take it away with your selection here. You and Steve agree, and there has been a bit of money for this horse since post-Dex again.
Oh,
so the price we have, wow. Yeah, the price we have on document will have to come down. So the price I have currently is around 9.0. But Dan, make your case and then your thoughts on the price at the moment.
Yeah, so initially she was at 17.0, 15.0, and that's Flower of Scotland for the informed Sandy Thompson yard. But obviously now seemingly into 9.0, I guess people are seeing the same things. Worth noting the yard form firstly. So from October to January, they had 7 winners from 77 runners. This month so far, they've had 7 winners from 28 runners, and a further 9 have placed. They're absolutely flying at the minute. And we know the Ida heavy ground, this is a real specialist trip in general. And this mare's relished marathon trips on everything we've seen so far. She won the Borders National at Kelso in 2022. Really well backed on that occasion as well. Landed a bit of a gamble. Only been seen 3 times since that, and really not had a condition since then. Wasn't really right on a reappearance, as many of the yards horses were. Was pulled up quickly. I think you can forgive that. And if bouncing back to the level of form she showed in that Scottish Borders National, we know she'll handle conditions probably better than any of these. And this is one of those races where you're just looking for a horse who will handle the test, because it is very unique and not every horse will appreciate it. And we know she will. The mark, while still higher than the last winning mark, I don't think is unreasonable, especially because I think that kind of goes slightly out the window when you're dealing with tests of this nature. I think she's got an outstanding chance if she bounces back to the level of form and level of ability we've shown previously. And she's absolutely, I think she's primed for this, for a yard who are absolutely flying along.
And for those currently listening and post-recording, 9.0 currently, Dan, would you want it any more shorter than that, or is that a sort of limit?
I think she could even get a bit shorter. I think I wasn't surprised she gets down to about 7.0, to be honest. I mean, Angler's Crag is the favourite on the back of a hat trick, and it's a horse I've backed a few times with old connections. But I say this is a specialist test, and people will hone in on the fact that this is a mare who loves these conditions. So I think she'll get a bit shorter still, to be honest.
Okay, don't get put off by the gamble here. Steve, 9.0 for you, Flower Scotland.
Yeah, she's got to have a good chance. She stays, which is in races like this, you often get horses that are stepping up in distance for the first time, because there's not a huge amount of these races over 4 miles plus. But she's clearly thrives over it. I wouldn't worry about her return to action. She had a break since then as well. And the other thing to note, it is a real test. This obviously 4 mile 1 in heavy ground, but Newcastle's got stiff finish as well, and it does seem to suit the winners tend to be held up in the race, and that's exactly where Flower of Scotland's likely to be held up by Sean Quinlan. So yeah, I can see why people are backing her.
Okay. Currently 9.0, as we touched on there. That's all the jumps action. Dan can take a break, and to a point I can take a break here for the next 3 or 4 minutes. Steve, 2 ITV races on the all-weather at Southwell. One at a big price you're tipping up here, 17.0 High and Mate in the 245.
Yeah, but I would go place only with Higher Mate, because I do think that the favourite Clarendon House might just be head and shoulders above. Certainly what Clarendon House did in the autumn, went into the winter, winning at Wolverhampton, and then again over this course and distance quite easily, beating Bedford Flyer, who was also in there, and went over to Maidan last time and ran really well in a Group 2 behind Star of Mystery, who is looking like one of the stars of the Dubai Carnival this year. So yeah, Clarendon House, I wouldn't want to take him on win personally. I wouldn't mind a small win bet on Higher Mate, but mainly the place side of it, because this is a horse that thrives at Southwell. Has got an excellent record at Southwell. I was really impressed with the way that Higher Mate won last time out in a handicap, beating, funnily enough, a horse trained by Robert Cowell called Above, who's Robert Cowell's got the favourite in this race. But Higher Mate won by 5 lengths. To do that over 5 furlongs at Southwell takes some doing. And it's got a really good record. And even though Higher Mate is now, a 6-year-old, I do think he's still improving. So he's definitely worth a place at this listed level. And given that the favourite takes out so much, a place bet or a small win bet as well would might just be the one.
Okay, and the theme of big prices, another decentish price in the Winter Derby for you, Steve. This is the 320 at Southwell. Lord North is your 275 favourite. Military Order is 3.5, but you like the fourth fav here. Yeah,
I'm going to take a chance on Aidan, who was, the last time we saw this horse, seems a long time ago. Well, it was a long time ago, nearly 2 years, went fourth in the 2,000 guineas to Caribus and Native Trail, and always looked like a horse that was going to improve going up in distance from a mile. Certainly had won the Fielden Stakes over a mile and 1, and even that wasn't far enough, and beat Mascella that day, who went on to hold himself in group races later on in the season in those kind of like back end Group 3s, and the way Mascala blew him away in the Fielden Stakes was really impressive. Sorry, Aidan blew Mascala away. Okay, you don't know how fit the Aidan's going to be for this first run for nearly 2 years, but Andrew Boulding's taken over the training from Roger Varian. I'm going to take a chance that he is fit enough, because Lord North, you know what you get with Lord North. He's going to run to his level. He's a horse that is pretty reliable. I mean, he's won Group 1s in the past, certainly in Dubai. I mean, he's coming off the back of a Group 1 win in Dubai, but I'm not totally convinced that he's certainly not a Group 1 horse, a champion kind of thing. Aidan could be a very smart. It always looked like he was going to be a very smart horse. He was a Derby contender when he ran in the Guineas. So hopefully he'll be back on his form, and he's got no problem with the all weather. So yeah, I'd take a chance with Aidan.
7.0 at the time of recording. We're done for the ITV action, but Dan overall loves these any other bets section. Loves throwing a best bet in there as well, and I like all three of these horses, at least as horses, that is. So make the case why they're all going to win on Saturday.
Yes, unsurprisingly, none are at Southwell, but we've gone around the grounds for this. So the first one's maybe a bit rogue because it hasn't actually beaten a horse over fences yet, but the 233 at Chepstow, a horse called Blue Hop. So he was, to be fair though, for 2 runs over fences, he's had plenty of excuse on both occasions. He was set an impossible task on his chase debut when he was against the likes of Ginny's Destiny and Grey Dawning and co at Cheltenham. Obviously, never really going to have much of a chance against those. Obviously, they're leading Cheltenham Festival contenders. Then went to Doncaster on good ground, really badly hampered down the back on that occasion, and also picked up a bit of an injury, according to his trainer, in a stable tour. So again, you can write off that performance as well. You go back to his hurdles form and the form he showed in bumpers. That would give you a fair bit of encouragement. He's dropped £5 from his opening mark now to 110. Won a bumper on heavy ground, which is going to prove crucial at Chepstow because, again, it's very testing going. They seem to have thought a fair bit of this horse. I think the Connections actually bought the second when he won a bumpers. They clearly thought he was going to be quite decent. So in a small field, much more realistic target, I think a mark 110. He is capable of doing much better off. Then we go to Newcastle for one of the old boys, the 4 o'clock, Jason the Militant. Obviously, former Grade 2 winner of Henry de Bromhead. Been with Phil Kirby for a couple of seasons now. Actually ran really well on his debut for the yard in the handicap at Cheltenham of 154. Was up there for all the way, but hasn't really necessarily shown that much since. Dropped £27 in 5 runs to a mark 127. And he was well beaten last time out, but he ran really well for a long way. That was at Haydock on 2 mile free, first time cheek pieces on. Only really gave best between the last 2 hurdles on that occasion. Back in trip here to just over 2 miles. Heavy ground, we know is ideal. Small field, lower caliber of opposition, will go from the front. He seems to have conditions here, and if he's going to pick up a win, probably ever again, it's going to be in a race like this. So I think he's worth chancing in the 4 o'clock at Newcastle. And then the 4:10 at Kempton, Heltenham. Rapidly progressive handicapper last season, won 3 in a row before he took a heavy fall at Cheltenham towards the back end of the season, where I think Dan Skelton said afterwards he shouldn't have run him there because he's not really a Cheltenham horse. He likes flatter tracks. But he's been really strangely campaigned this season. Won a novice hurdle on his reappearance, then went back over fences at Aintree. And if you remember, it was the day at Aintree where the conditions were abysmal. I think it was the same day Pembroke won his novice chase, and he was the only horse of 4 to finish. I mean, 9 started in this handicap, 6 of them pulled up. Heltenham finished 3rd, well beaten, but was looked after. It was just one of those days where this is a horse who likes soft ground, but he doesn't like a swamp, and it really was that. And then again, back over hurdles at Lingfield at the Winter Millions meeting, under 12 stone in the competitive handicap hurdle. He snuck into the race and looked like he might play a hand, and then just kind of faded out of it. But again, undulating track, hurdles, not really for him, but finally he's going to go back over fences, flat track, 2.5 miles, conditions that saw him to really good effect towards the middle part of last season. And the Connections were saying this could be a horse who competes in a Coral Gold Cup down the line. They thought that much of him. So the fact that he's been dropped £4 this season for 1 chase run, which is extremely excusable, I think he's got a really big chance off a reduced mark 130 against horses, for the most part, who are more exposed and quite out of form.
Okay, yeah, we have Blue Hop, Jason the Militant, and Heltenham named after 4 days in March, apparently, in the 410 at Kempton. But those three and all those bets put on the podcast will be available on insights.matchbook.com, or just search Matchbook Insights or get the links off our Twitter account. Matchbook Zero long shot. Check out Matchbook Zero. You'll be invariably getting the best price. These are win-only bets, but a good way to play and a good fun way of playing and a big price. Steve, your Matchbook Zero long shot.
Well, my long shot's going to be in the same race as the best bet, so that might confuse a few people. But
Go for it.
Yeah, unanswered prayers in 3:35. Chris Gordon in form. Apart from departing at the last at Ascot twice, when one of those wasn't his fault, I think he's definitely overpriced, and he's on the back of a breathing operation as well.
Okay, we mentioned 34.0 in and around. Do check that price very close to the off. You may be surprised at how big you could get on Matchbook Zero there. Dan, for you.
Well, Flower of Scotland and the Ida obviously was a bigger prize coming into the podcast, but clearly there's been a bit of support. We'll see how the market figures out, but she's a mare who will handle conditions, and that is a necessity for a race like the Ida.
No, I'll allow that. I'll allow that. Steve, you're going to lay lump sum. It's in around 3.0, was 2.75. If it gets to 2.6-ish, that's the price you want to lay out.
Yeah, if there is a move for lump sum, I would be definitely against that one, because even though, like we were saying before, even though he finished in front of our fancy, Dan and I's fancy, in that race, Fiercely Proud, he was never able to get himself in the race, and this sharp track like Kempton just won't suit him if he's ridden like that. I know the softer ground will help, there's no doubt about that, but I just think he'd be vulnerable around a track like that, and his form with Fiercely Proud says that Fiercely Proud should finish in front of him.
Okay, and it's Bow to Greatness for you as best bet. Yeah,
that's also in the big race, the big handicap, which, what are they calling it now?
Coral Trophy.
I
put it in to be clear, but yeah.
Ben Pauling, another informed yard, and like I said earlier, I think that if you go back to this horse's run on Grand National Day last year, he's got an absolutely magnificent chance, and he's unexposed over 3 miles, and he's got an informed pair in Ben Pauling and Ben Jones jockey.
Okay, final word to you, Dan.
Yeah, best bet's going to come from the 410 at Kempton. That's Heltenham. Finally gets conditions back in his favour. This looks a winnable race. Was rapidly progressive before, a bit of a strange campaign, so I think he can get back on track with conditions to suit.
Yeah, both guys sort of bottling in, going for late races, I find. So come 3:30 on Saturday, they're still in the mix. I know your game. I've done all this before. Right, what may happen? Something 5th or 6th race. Give me a chance at least to have a day. But yeah, my thanks to Steve Jones, Dan Overall. Those guys will be back alongside your esteemed host, Tom Stanley, with guests, including Michal DC. He is definitely the headline, I have to say, judging by a few Twitter reactions. But yeah, do check them out Monday, 7:15 p.m. Do hope you can join us live, but you can get it straight after as a podcast in your podcast feed or on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until then, we will chat to you next week. Bye-bye.